Canada continues its dangerous drift towards China under Carney's leadership. Canada appears to be shifting its foreign policy toward renewed engagement with China. Prime Minister Mark Carney plans to meet senior Chinese leaders soon, following Foreign Minister Anita Anand's recent trip to Beijing to mark the 20th anniversary of the Canada-China Strategic Partnership. While framed as diplomatic pragmatism, this signals dangerous naivety. China has repeatedly been accused of infiltrating Canadian institutions, meddling in elections, and exploiting economic ties for strategic gain. Globally, Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative has turned nations into debt-ridden client states, seizing control of critical infrastructure and resources. Canada risks similar subservience, trading sovereignty for short-term economic gain. Aligning with China would mean endorsing a regime rooted in surveillance, censorship, and authoritarian control. True sovereignty requires standing firmly with the free world, particularly the United States, and rejecting Beijing's growing influence in Canada's affairs. So, in what ways has Beijing already infiltrated or influenced Canadian institutions?
The way I kind of look at this is in sections. So, I guess you'd start with politics. Kind of like politics, organized crime, corporate, institutional, and society, right? So, if you look at politics, we know they've got a number of MPs that are aligned with China that are already MPs, all the way up. They've got everything from municipal politics to federal politics. They've got people in there that are aligned with China, came from China. They're in their camp. We also know that they've interfered in our elections. We know at least the last 3. I would suggest it's been ongoing for quite some time. I don't think they just built that apparatus, 10 years ago. I think this has been going for a very long time. And I think they're becoming more sophisticated. I think they're doing a better job.
Just to bolster your point there quickly. Yeah, they were doing this even with back in the Clinton administration, which was back 90s, right?
Yeah. So you look at this and you kind of go, okay, since the 90s. So call it 30 years for sure. We know they've been manipulating our elections. We know they've got people in government all the way up. So that's kind of the political side. We also know they've got all these diaspora groups, right? Which will influence elections and influence voting. So then you look at sort of the corporate side. So they've got their hands in a lot of businesses in Canada. Some of it's through organized crime money, dirty money working its way in, then going into businesses in Canada. They've also used a bunch of shell corporations to then buy up a lot of our resources to actually control natural resources and things that give Canadians or Canada strength as an economy. So they're pretty deep in there. Actually, I'm not even sure we know the limits, because a lot of times once money's behind a wall and through a shell corp, it's kind of a black hole. I think it's a lot worse than we believe. That's my take on that. From an institutional perspective, they're everywhere. They're in our education system. They're in the CBSA. I recognize that's a government arm, but so are schools. But when you kind of look at how they're operating, they even have their own police stations here. And then when that case went to court, it was thrown out essentially, and they were going to countersue Canada. Like, what are you talking? They have police stations here. That's preposterous. The amount of shit that they're getting away with is insane. From a societal perspective, they've purchased a lot of our land. Now, they own a lot of homes, and they're responsible for the Vancouver model, which is when money was funneled through organized crime to then purchase housing in Canada. Because once housing's purchased, again, that's a black hole behind that wall. You don't get to look into where the money came from. So that's another sort of gap in Canada's market. I don't necessarily have a huge issue with that in terms of not tracing the money afterwards, because I think that's a little intrusive. However, it's being leveraged by organized crime. But there's another thing that popped up the other day. The amount of farmland that they own in Canada is insane. And in fact, they're starting to buy farmland on the border of the United States, it's just starting to irk them, because in Canada, at least, in the US, they're starting to clamp down at least. So, that's even more control over our resources if they own our land and how we farm and our food and stuff like that. And then obviously you look at organized crime, or this is their secondary hub. Next to China, Canada's number 2 on their list in terms of where they operate from and how they operate. We not only allow them to use our financial institutions to wash money, they use us as a staging ground to move drugs into America. They work with Mexico and India here, whether it's how the drugs are being put together and then how they're being distributed. So organized crime in Canada, run through China, the Triads being the largest organized criminal group in the world, rather. It's overwhelming. So when you look at all of this together, Canada is surrounded by China so deeply that even if we go the other way, I don't think we can fully unplug.
Yeah, that's what's crazy about when people talk, say, for instance, about the threat of Trump and what he poses to Canada. It's like even in the lead up during the election season, when Carney was asked what Canada's biggest threat is, or who Canada's biggest threat is, he himself admitted it was China. So, like, how on one hand are you saying China is the biggest threat, but then also we're going to cut ties with America, who also views China, at least under the Trump administration, as the similar threat, and go, no, we're not going to work with those guys. We're going to go work with China. Insane. You're admitting that you're essentially deepening ties with a hostile nation.
Yes.
But then also too, you talk about the land that they own. It's not just farmland too. It's critical land. For instance, there was a zoo that was purchased right next to a Alder Grove communications site, which was for the Canadian military. So they're buying up land right next to even Canadian military stuff. Then you even see as well over in BC, it was Powell River, I believe was the town name, where they pretty much bought up everything. The industrial base, they bought up a marine center, which they can then use to send back data back to China about the weather patterns. Again, that stuff is very important if you were ever actually want to invade a country militarily. And so we're just allowing them to do whatever the hell they want here. And also, like, even when it comes to the crime and the fentanyl stuff, like, it's not just that they're taking strategic positions or benefiting themselves economically. It's that they're flooding our country and America, especially through Canada, with drugs designed to kill people.
Yes.
And it's working.
Yeah, 100%. It's killing 100,000 people a year pretty much between Canada and the United States, roughly.
I think it's probably more than that, because it's roughly 90 to 100,000 in the States alone. It's the number one killer for military-aged men in America. And so then you add on Canada on top of that, which I'm sure would be another 10 or 20,000. Yeah, you're over, you're
right around there.
Yeah, you're over it. But it's like the fact that, our political class is I mean, it's the same thing with the tariffs as well. When Trump put on tariffs, everybody loses their mind. And even, hey, I agree, it would be terrible, and it has been bad for Canada's economy. People don't want to open up shop here, or they'll take their capital and leave. So definitely devastating, but silence when China puts tariffs on Canada, and we put tariffs on Chinese EVs and all of this kind of stuff. But only one direction gets the outrage, because it's politically beneficial, because then you can just say our opponents are exactly like Trump down in the States.
Well, I think one of the things that I would use as sort of like a proxy, or like just to better understand the relationship, the true relationship, because we're told one thing and then it's always another, right? So here's what I would look at. When you can't offend another nation or another group, they are the ones that are in control of you, effectively, right? So it's the same thing here. All of our media and all of our politicians can rip America apart, rip Trump apart, just go to town. They don't care. They're aligned with the Democratic Party. That's that. Trump is the devil, right? Don't talk shit about China.
No.
They'll be like, oh yeah, well, they're an adversary. Did you just whisper that? Yeah, I whispered it. That's as much as they will do. So if you want to understand where we're currently at and who's in control, think about how little we can actually say about China at the government level and in the media level. That tells you all you need to know. We are in deep, deep trouble with the amount of control that nation has over us.
Well, yeah, even Sam Cooper had to, he's been the number one reporter on this for over a decade now in Canada on how China is subverting our nation. And even he had to leave corporate journalism, essentially, because they were telling him to kind of tone down the rhetoric, or not even rhetoric, but just, hey,
research.
make sure, yeah.
The truth.
Stop
telling the truth so loudly. Got it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you and I are much more, we engage in much more rhetoric, kind of effective, bombastic conversation. But
no.
Come on. Hey, I don't think it's wrong, but we're less concerned with the academic niceties.
For sure. Yeah, well, because we don't have China paying us any money.
Right. But you've got a guy like Sam Cooper who is sitting here going, nope, I'm a journalist. It's not important what my opinion is. It's only just to give you the facts. And he gets pushed out of corporate journalism.
Yes.
I could 100% see why guys like you and I would get pushed out of a place like CBC, because we'd be like, I don't care what you say to me. But
I don't even think they'd let me in the building. There's probably a picture of us on the wall.
Undesirable number one and two.
You're number one though. You did make the CBC real.
But if anybody wants to go down and learn more about this in depth, we did a entire documentary on China's subversion of Canada about 5 months ago, which is called The Silent Dragon: How China Conquered North America Without Firing a Single Shot. But yeah, we go into every aspect that you just talked about, with it being how they infiltrate diplomatically, because I used Clinton as an example of how it goes back to the 90s. But even now that I think about it, you can even find articles dating back as well about how there was sketchy financing going on within the Chrétien
that's about the same time that's the same time as
late 90s. Yeah, we go over the diplomatic stuff, we go over the business stuff, how even like Zuckerberg was meeting with China's head of censorship and telling him how he was giving Xi Jinping's book about Chinese or socialism with Chinese characteristics to his staff. And so you see these policies where they were clearly currying favor with the Chinese government. You've got the BlackRock type institutions, the McKinsey advisors. McKinsey held some sort of like I can't remember if it was a staff party or whether it was like a meeting or some sort of like getaway kind of thing. But either way, McKinsey's the corporation held an event about like a kilometer from the Uyghur internment camps in Xinjiang, China. And so like all of these industries, McKinsey is deeply embedded with our liberal government.
Yes.
And so you see kind of how this web works. But yeah, in our documentary, we hit all of those points and go over in depth, and definitely come in with all the receipts there as well.